Good morning and welcome to our Sunday presentation. ULT, United Lodge of Theosophists, Washington, D.C. meets every Sunday at 11 a.m. for the discussion of a particular topic. Today's presentation will be on Anton Mesmer and mesmerism, with emphasis on working of mesmerism on man. And next week, it'll be the White Lotus Day. Please also note that we meet every first and third Sunday of the month at 12:30 p.m. to read and discuss selected theosophical writings. We're currently having roundtable discussions on the Bhagavad Gita. Our lodge, United Lodge of Theosophists, is guided by its declaration, which states the following. The policy of this lodge is independent devotion to the cause of theosophy, without professing attachment to any theosophical organization. It is loyal to the great founders of the theosophical movement, but does not concern itself with dissensions or differences of individual opinion. The work it has on hand and the end it keeps in view are too absorbing and too lofty to leave it the time or inclination to take part in side issues. That work and that end is the dissemination of the fundamental principles of the philosophy of theosophy and the exemplification in practice of those principles, through a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. It holds that the unassailable basis for union among theosophists, wherever and however situated, is similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching, and therefore has neither constitution, bylaws, nor officers, the sole bond between its associates being that basis. And it aims to disseminate this idea among theosophists in the furtherance of unity. It regards as theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization. And it welcomes to its association all those who are in accord with its declared purposes and who desire to fit themselves by study and otherwise to be better able to help and teach others. The true theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all. Today's reading is from the Voice of the Silence. These instructions are for those ignorant of the dangers of the lower ithi. He who would hear the voice of nada, the soundless sound, and comprehend it, he has to learn the nature of dharana. Having become indifferent to objects of perception, the pupil must seek out the raja of the senses, the thought producer, he who awakes illusion. The mind is the great slayer of the real. Let the disciple slay the slayer. For when to himself his form appears unreal, as do on waking all the forms he sees in dreams. When he has ceased to hear the many, he may discern the one, the inner sound which kills the outer. Then only, not till then, shall he forsake the region of asat, the false, to come unto the realm of sat, the true. Before the soul can see, the harmony within must be attained, and fleshly eyes be rendered blind to all illusion. Before the soul can hear, the image, man, has to become as deaf to roarings as to whispers, to cries of bellowing elephants as to the silvery buzzing of the golden firefly. Before the soul can comprehend and may remember, she must unto the silent speaker be united, just as the form to which the clay is modeled is first united with the potter's mind. For then the soul will hear and will remember, and then to the inner ear will speak the voice of the silence. And now for today's talk.
Welcome, friends. This is a continuation with mesmerism, and as you remember, that it was called magnetism, psychologizing, fascination at that time. Anton Mesmer was born in 1734, and we had said then that he came for the 18th century precursor of HPB. And even though he made it popularized both in Germany and Austria and France, he was at the end marked as a charlatan as a result of the report that the king had requested. And Benjamin Franklin, as you remember, was on that committee, and it was then decided that since the scientists of the day could not touch it, feel it, see it, they concluded that there was nothing being transferred from the mesmerizer to the person who was being mesmerized. The connotation of it was that he was a charlatan, and he left Paris and did not return to it when invited later on. Germany exerted the same invitation, and he also declined it. He remained near Marsburg, and in the village life he helped all those people around him who were his neighbors but very poor. So he gave care with no fee. In other words, it was free of charge. Now, in The Secret Doctrine, HPB tells us that at the root of the change going on in the present race is the great cyclic transition of which is going to happen during the age that we are in, and that we shall, she wrote in another place, transmit ether, or rather the gross subdivision of it in its fullness, to the sixth root race. Who are we? We are the fifth of the fifth root. So we are the fifth root, fifth sub. And we are giving this gross subdivision of ether to the sixth root. What is the gross subdivision of ether? It's the astral light. And without the scientists becoming aware of the existence of the astral light in the air around us, there is no way that anyone is going to be able to see what is being transferred from the mesmerizer to the person who is mesmerized. So today, the scientists booted out mesmerism, and they called it hypnotic experiments, and accepted it. Yeah, so same thing, basically. So we see that from Europe, the mesmerism of the 18th century came to root in the United States in the 19th century. And Dodds was one of the ones that popularized it, and he actually gave a lecture to some of the senators at that time. So, the hypnotists claim the merit of discoveries, but as we remember, even the uneducated so-called charlatans of the 18th and 19th centuries all had that same ability to mesmerize. In other words, the condition of the person was psychologized condition. Psychologized condition. So, what exactly happens then? We need to understand it. Now, the great question as brought to your attention is there an actual fluid thrown off by the mesmerizer? HPB declares that there is such a fluid, and those who can see into the plane to which it belongs assert its existence as a subtle form of matter. Subtle form of matter. This fluid is composed in part of the astral substance around everyone and in part of the physical atoms in a finely divided state. And some call it aura. And Mr. Judge says this is a very generalized statement when we say aura, but he says the actual definition of it will not be given at the time that this philosophy was brought out, and that we need to accept the word and work with it. So this aura, then, he says, is thrown off by the mesmerizer upon his subject and is received by the latter in a department of his inner constitution. And never in the West, he says, these experiments have been talked about or described. And it wakes, he says, it wakes up certain inner and non-physical divisions of the person operated on, causing a change in relation between the various and numerous sheaths surrounding the inner man, making possible different degrees of intelligence to come forth. When a person is in a hypnotic state or mesmerized, whether it is complete or partial, it immediately paralyzes the power of the body to throw off its impressions. So it causes paralyzing. To throw off its impressions. So he says that in ordinary waking life, everyone, without being able to disentangle himself, is subject to the impressions from the whole organisms. In other words, our perceptions, gathering information, has to go through the brain, and then it is submitted to acceptance or rejection, but the whole body participates in it. But when this paralysis occurs, the body is quiescent. It is not in the picture. So it is the inner man then who responds. And he says, in cases where the subjects are have gone or are in this paralyzed condition, the brain is left sufficiently free to obey the commands of the mesmerizer and compel the organs to respond in speech. And not all the time, but sometimes. So we have now, he says, have come to the point where psychoanalyzing patients under hypnotic procedures is taking place in the West. We all know that. But the hypnotizer does not know what exactly happens to the person he's putting under hypnosis. And we discussed the difference last week between mesmerism and hypnotism. Okay. So, what happens is the astral body responds. How many sheaths do we have? We have 7 sheaths, as we talk about it all the time. And each sheath is then subdivided into another 7. So the astral body obviously has 7 sheaths within itself. And we're told that the organs that we see in the physical body have absolutely no power by themselves to carry on any function whatsoever. It's the astral that imparts it that mobility. In other words, without the astral body, we would not be able to exist on Earth, because it's the model body on which this body is built. So when this body is quiet, it is the inner man that is responding. And how are the scientists of our day going to come to this decision when they don't accept anything that they cannot touch, feel, and see? Because HPB tells us that these inner faculties cannot be seen with these eyes that we have in existence today. They require the activation of the inner eyes, in other words, the astral eyes, to be able to see. Now, we know that we have a circulatory system in the physical body. What about the astral body? Does it not have organs? Mr. Judge, in his article called Mesmerism, says these organs have their own currents, circulation, if you will, and methods of receiving and storing impressions. They are those which in a second of time seize and keep the faintest trace of any object or word coming before the waking man. They not only keep them, but very often give them out. And when the person is mesmerized, the body is quiet and it does not interfere with it. And the astral lives, he says, are divided into many classes and grades, and each one of them has a whole series of ideas and facts peculiar to itself, as well as centers in the ethereal body to which they relate. Instead of now the brain dealing with the sensations of the body, it deals with something quite different and reports what these inner organs see in any part of a space to which they're directed. And these impressions are experiences of the inner man. And it is not the higher self that is involved here at all. These varied pictures, thus seized from every quarter, are normally overborne by the great roar of the physical life, which is the sum total of physical expression possible if the person is normal. They show themselves usually only by glimpses when we have sudden ideas or recollections. And of course, the aura is like a mist. It's ethereal. But it is able, it is said here, to exert tremendous force. Why? It's electromagnetic, it's electricity. And Mr. Judge says, even during trance, the information obtained can be what is stored in the physical cells. They're gone to sleep, but nevertheless, the information they retain can be accessed, and what comes through the psychologized person is just one aspect of the whole picture that is being talked about. And here we are told, as the astral senses of any person are the direct inheritance of his own prior incarnations and are not the product of family heredity, they cannot transcend their own experience, and hence their cognitions are limited by it, no matter how wonderful their action appears to him who is using only the physical senses. And their physical organs. In the ordinary healthy person, these astral senses are inextricably linked with the body and limited by the apparatus which it furnishes during the waking state. And only when one falls asleep or into a mesmerized state or trance can they act in a somewhat independent manner. This they do in sleep, when they live another life than that compelled by the force and the necessities of the waking organism. And when there is a paralyzation of the body by the mesmeric fluid, they can act, because the impressions from the physical cells are inhibited. So, what happens then during this mesmerization process is that this mesmeric fluid brings this paralysis about, making the body quiescent, because it creeps steadily over the whole body of the subject, changing the polarity of the cells in every part. So this is the difference that occurs. It changes the polarity of the cells. Polarity. This goes on in every part, and then this disconnection of the outer from the inner man takes place. As a whole system of physical nerves, and we know that they're sympathetic. When one part of the nervous system responds, then all the rest of it follows. It's sympathetic. And Mr. Judge tells us that there are many secrets about this process, but he says it will not be given out to the general public. And then he asks a question. When this paralyzing occurs, and the astral man is disconnected from the body, does it have a structure? And which one of the mesmerizers today know it? And how many have absolutely no knowledge of it or deny that such exists? And how many of them are truly trained to carry on with this process? Today, what he asked then is totally applicable, because until the sevenfold nature of man and the universe is accepted and some knowledge is obtained about it, they're then doing it in the dark. So, are they doing good or are they doing bad, is what the question is during these hypnotic experiments, or actually hypnotizing people. Now, we did say last time that the great difference between mesmerism is that this fluid that is being sent is expansive. It does not do any harm to the person receiving it, because their ego is still free to act. But in the hypnotic state, the ego is disconnected from the bodily activity of the person who is hypnotized, and so the individual is left totally at the mercy of the person who has caused this hypnotic event to occur, because it's from outside in and it is constrictive. Mesmerizing is from inside out and it's expansive. It's two different processes, but the effect that we get is that the body is paralyzed. And it says here that the inner astral man is definite and it is coherent. Just as the outer body has a spine, in the spinal column today, then this inner man also has a spinal column. As the physical, so does the inner man. The astral has it. And it has a brain at the top. We have a brain in the skull, so the astral man also has a brain. It is material because it is made up of finely divided matter and is not of the nature of a spirit. At maturity of the fetus or child before the birth, this form is fixed, coherent, and lasting, undergoing but a small alteration from that day until death. So this nature then does not change. Our body is constantly going change. Moment to moment, we breathe in, we eat, we're putting things out, expelling things out, and every 7 years our body goes through a complete change. But the astral remains as is. No change. It's fixed at birth, and we keep it until we have lived the lifespan we have come to spend on earth. So, these inner parts are more permanent than the outer ones. The material organs, bones and tissues, as we said, go under change. And the ancients call this change the constant momentary dissolution of minor units of matter. It is not the case with the inner man. It only alters from one life to another life, being constructed at the time of reincarnation to last the whole period of existence. So at birth it is potentially of a certain size, and when that limit is reached, it stops the further extension of the body. And at death, what we call death, it is not due to bodily disintegration, but that the term of the astral body is reached, and when it no longer are able to hold the outer frame intact, then the material molecules being exhausted, they disintegrate, and the sleep of death supervenes. So all these organs of the outer visible body then are interconnected to the inner man. And Mr. Judge comes forward with this astral nerves. He calls those nerves astral nerves. Astral nerves. And just as we said we have a spinal column and that the astral has it too, it says that the astral nerves kind of expand when they reach the brain, and it exerts more energy there than elsewhere. And these astral nerves have their relation, it is stated, to the heart, to the pit of the throat, umbilical center, the spleen, and the sacral plexus. And he's asking, who knows in the West how this is connected to the astral body and what the functions are. And obviously we still are in the same place as we were before. It is still not known. So the astral nerves are channels in a way, or currents that the forces play up and down, because as we know, the astral is the link between the physical and the spiritual aspect of us. Without it, there would be no connection to our higher aspects. So the forces then are divided into three in this astral cone. One cone is positive, the center is neutral, and the other cone is negative. Just as in the human being, it is, in the physical body, it is exactly the same thing. So this forces, positive, negative, neutral, plays up and down through the spinal cone, affecting the astral nerves everywhere in the physical body. So during this mesmerization process, the outer body has been cut off its exertion of influences, and it is also known that during the hypnotic state there is a point where sometimes the hypnotizer loses control over their subject, and it scares them, because it's the astral that they really lose control of, because it is electromagnetic, obviously, and they don't know how to quite control it. Under certain conditions, it is stated, it does escape. So we are told that unless we understand the implications of each sheath exerting a different force, and in the hypnotic state, where is the speech coming from? On what sheath is it related to? Because in no experiment is all of it participant in it. The information or the knowledge that is being discussed comes from a particular section of that body. It is not all of it that we're talking about during those philosophical discussions that the operator thinks they're holding. So Mr. Judd says the effect of the operator is almost always to color the reports made by the subject under their control. Because remember, the ego is cut off, and the hypnotized person during that condition is totally under the control of the hypnotizer, and their thinking also is affecting the person who is being hypnotized. And Mr. Judd says no other information would be passed along to us, that whatever is known by the general public is sufficient for every one of us to conduct our own experiments on ourselves, in other words, to learn how this condition can be brought about during our own experiments. Now, why is this subject so important to us? Because, as mentioned at the beginning, the secret doctrine says this subdivision of ether is going to be handed over to the sixth root race when we have gone through our period of psychic development. Now, when we read psychic development from the voice of the silence, the statement was that the ED or CDs are divided into two different compartments. One is coarse and is involved with the lower psychic nature, and the other requires the highest training of our spiritual nature. And this is the issue at hand. And in Psychic and Pneumatic Action, she told us that a medium is simply one in whose personal ego or terrestrial mind or psyche the percentage of astral light so preponderates as to impregnate with it their whole physical constitution. Every organ and cell thereby is attuned, so to speak, and subjected to an enormous abnormal tension. And so now we come to this cyclic great transition that our race is going through, and it will continue to do so according to the writings. And in her Lucifer, there's an article where it says, when the equinox is entered, and we are then in the Aquarius sign, psychologists will have some extra work to do, and the psychic idiosyncrasies of humanity will enter on a great change. Why? Well, obviously, the influence of the astral light is being felt more and more. We don't see it yet, but it will be visible at the end of this round. And all of it is not negative, because if we look around, we see the mental imbalance, but there are evidences that mental balance is also going to change, because man is now at a point where he's showing psychological interest in his mind. We'll put it down here. He wants to know what the mind is, what is its characteristics, how can it be made to benefit humanity more. And we gave a lot of talks on this subject, but this scientist says in his writings, it is perfectly possible that today man's so-called supernormal or extrasensory faculties are in the same case as were his mathematical faculties during the first or second glaciations of the Ice Age, barely more than a potentiality. So it is obvious that we're going through psychological changes in the subjective processes of our being. Is this just curiosity? I don't. The student does not think so. A lot of scientists also do not think so. And they're asking the question, it had been dormant for thousands of years, but now it is active. It is being experimented with, in other words. You can see that meditation, that word comes up a lot in a lot of different areas of our being. And HPB had said in one of her articles that the six rays, the forerunners of the six rays, would at first be regarded as anomalies, in other words, abnormal oddities, both physically and mentally. And one other scientist, Professor Rice, asks, ought we perhaps to assume that clairvoyance is our normal state and that ordinary perception is something subnormal, a kind of myopia? Then he says the question to ask is, ought we to have expected that by right, so to speak, every mind would be aware of everything, or at any rate of an indefinitely wide range of things? The puzzle would then be to explain why the ordinary human mind is in fact aware of so little. So here we can see that the scientists are moving in this direction too, and asking a lot of questions as to why our mind observes so very little. Well, they of course have to come to this understanding of the play between the higher and the lower mind that we talk about a lot. The intellectual mind of its own cannot perceive all these realities. We have to rely on the higher. One scientist, a metaphysician, says perhaps superphysical cognition is possible to us, and he returns to look at monadology of Leibniz. And every monad, he says, represents the entire universe from its own point of view, and the perceptions which are correlated are called telepathy with everybody. Well, of course, Leibniz did not correctly define evolution, but HPB tells us in The Secret Doctrine that he came very close to it. And the article suggests that the foundations of the wiser liberalism of tomorrow are being laid down by the new conception of man as essentially being a mind being. This recognition of the primacy of rational and spiritual men may be taken as evidence of the part that intuition will play in the social philosophy of the future. The civilization of America is destined to accomplish the transition between the fifth and sixth sub-races of the great Aryan fifth, and the higher aspect of psychic development must include an awakening of Buddhic perception corresponding to the sixth sub-cycle of our race evolution. We are, HPB wrote, approaching the time when the pendulum of evolution will direct its swing decidedly upwards. And as the Akashic element enters our atmosphere, there should result in individual man a more conscious union between the fifth and sixth principles of the human constitution, while those whose spiritual nature remains inactive on this plane will have failed for the remainder of the cycle. And here is the key, why they have made such a tremendous effort to explain to us our psychic nature, the sevenfold constitution of nature and man and its correlative faculties to the great nature itself, and that those whose spiritual nature remains inactive on this plane will have failed for the remainder of the cycle. In other words, the evolutionary process will leave them behind. If we do not go along with nature's program in our evolutionary processes, it cannot push us forward anymore. HPB told us that at the midpoint, that process stops, and that our evolutionary process is dependent on our self-induced, self-devised effort to move forward. And then she says that until the next cycle changes and transforms entirely the inner nature, improving the texture of the spiritual mind, the scientists will not be able to perceive what is discussed in these articles, because their mind is not, or brain is not sufficiently developed enough to perceive it. So we will close it here and answer some questions and comments. Yes?
So you said the typical brain of man right now really is not developed enough to operate on the spiritual level? Is that kind of what you said?
That's not what was said. Perhaps it's not very clear.
Yeah, we got that, didn't we?
Okay. We said, perhaps we'll just let's go a bit this way here. We said that we have given talks on how the mind works. And there is two aspects. There's one mind, and until we understand what this does, we won't be able to understand any of this philosophy. Two aspects. Okay. Higher, noetic, and lower, phrenic. Okay, this is how it works. And since there's only one mind, it's our thinking, our speech, and our actions. Thought, speech, and action that determines in which direction the mind is going. Whether we know it, whether we accept it, whether we don't accept it, it makes no difference, because the mind works in this way and it's going to carry on working that way. And in the mind depends whether it is the noetic element that is in the preponderance or the ratio, or the phrenic. If it is the higher noetic element that is the tendency of the person, its thinking goes up. Up. Atma, Buddhi, Manas, and the lower quaternary, the physical body, astral body, passions and desires, and the lower mind. So it just depends which part we are going towards. And as this affinity moves more and more in this direction, then the noetic element is going to express itself. How does it express itself? It becomes universal. It's not concerned about itself anymore. Its action is for the whole. Whole or part of the whole at first. Part of whole. It's not self-oriented. It's little self. It's not self-oriented. It goes up. But if it is the phrenic element, personal, then it goes down. It pulls you to your lower tendencies. You're self-oriented, more money, more possessions. I think they say power, position, title, social status, all those things enter into it. And when we have become noetic, all those slowly fall off by their own force, because your affinity is not there to them anymore. And if money comes, you don't have to use it, because the noetic element is in a higher percentage, and it shows you how you can benefit humanity with it. And if position is yours, same thing. You use it to benefit society, not yourself, because that's its tendency. It doesn't mean that those things will not come to you. They can come to you naturally. What are you going to do with it is the question, whether you're going to go up or down with it. Because we are going to eventually be put in positions where we're going to make a difference for society. And this is why this training is necessary. Yes?
You mentioned polarity and how in your body upper is positive, neutral, and negative.
The column, the spinal column?
Spinal column.
Yes.
And here we talk about the higher mind, or higher self, lower self. Can it be also tied to that as well, in terms of polarity? If you're lower mind, lower self, do you become more negative? And it affects your lower. The direction of the current goes lower, and if you're higher, it goes to higher positive.
Well, it does not explain as to where your body is, but you are up and down those channels according to your thinking. Mm-hmm. Whether if your thinking is positive, the student does not know if the opposite power attracts or you're in the positive. I don't know how those things work in the astral body to make statements that are incorrect, because that experience this student does not have to say. And plus, they don't explain it. They don't want it given out. Okay? So here you have a spinal column. positive, neutral, negative, okay? And depending what your thinking is, or what your speech is, and what your activity is, all of these the channels or currents play up and down in the astral body. And we said that once it enters the skull or the brain, it opens in force, affecting all those key places, the spleen, umbilical cord, because plexuses are obviously the general area gets affected first, and then it distributes it all over the body. And depending which part of your body you're using, that's where the information is going to be collected from. And Mr. Judge says even your skin can provide information, and all of it might come from your skin. When he says skin or mucus, he doesn't just mean the mucus, say, in your mouth. He means all of the organs that have mucus participate in that process. And blood transmits everything, as you know. So if it is coming from the blood, then that's the collective facility that it's coming from. So what they say is, during the psychotic state or mesmerized state, the polarity of your body has changed in relation to your astral body, and that's why it falls asleep or gets disconnected from the inner man. But they don't say what that polarization does, because HPB also has an article where it says that when the polarity of the body changes in relation to Earth, you will levitate. How that comes about, the student does not know to tell you the details of it.
You're saying that in the meantime, motive is everything, because that drives your thinking process, really, becoming selfless and all that.
Okay. At first, now that we know why it was given, it obviously is an evolutionary process that the whole humanity is going to go through. But the key point with us is that she told us in the secret doctrine that our race has moved beyond the middle point. Let's put it up here. Here. She did it this way, and you can look at page 200. It tells you all the levels, and we're going that way. Now, the student saw another article where it says that in the higher realms there is no attraction, repulsion. That's very interesting, that as we go higher and higher, it comes closer to homogeneity. Homogeneous. So as we go up and up, your polarity obviously changes, because there is no polarity in the upper regions. Only material has polarity because it comes into the mineral world first. And she tells us on 289 of Secret Doctrine that that force, which she calls Fohat, awakens the dormancy of the atoms, and it moves some this way and some that way. So polarity comes into being in the mineral world, positive and negative. And then plant life has that, plus what else does it have? Instinct. Not instinct, but she calls it another, just like instinct. And then in the animal, you have those and other things. And in humanity, what does she say we have that the others don't have? The 7 fires in our 7 levels of consciousness, however you want to call it. Anyway, so as we go upper and upper, that homogeneity, we're becoming closer and closer to the homogeneous substance. And that is the key to learning what truth is, because we're looking at it from polarity on Earth. we have dislikes and likes, and when these munis or perfected men come about, that is totally gone. They look at humanity, all of humanity as their brothers and sisters. There is no differentiation between you, me, and other. We're all the same as far as they're concerned. We're all in that evolutionary process trying to get to our Father in heaven while we are on earth, because no other improvement can be achieved when we leave the earth. We're going to do it all here. So to answer your question, there it is. We have now turned and we're going towards a spirituality. And the article says the Akashic element that enters our atmosphere, because it's increasing its effect, there should result in individual men a more conscious union between the fifth and the sixth principles of the human constitution, while those whose spiritual nature remains inactive on this plane will have failed for the remainder of the cycle. In other words, nature will not assist us. We have to do the work for ourselves. We have abused everything around us, not knowingly perhaps, but we have gathered all these elementals. Now we're going to put them in the right order so that they become beneficial and not hinder. An astral body is made up of electromagnetic substances, ethereal but nevertheless electrical. So that should answer your question, right? Does it?
Yeah, now I have another question.
Oh,
You talked
okay.
about levitation, and I'm thinking about the biblical explanation of how Jesus went body and soul into heaven. If he's levitating, he can do that. You can
And
do
you're
that,
not going to
right?
levitate to heaven, are you?
Well,
We're
You
talking about the Earth's atmosphere.
disappearing.
We're talking about the Earth's atmosphere here. And they can make that body invisible anytime they want by changing its polarity to yours. It becomes invisible to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, it's something to think about. If we want to participate in the evolutionary process and move forward, how many thousands of years we have, who knows? She didn't tell us, but she told us that when we move into Aquarian age, our psychologists were going to be very busy because our system was changing. And look at our society today. What is happening? She told us that there was a change, and where is this change taking place? In the nervous system, because people feel under so much stress they can't handle it anymore, and that is why we see all this aberrant behavior out there. People picking up guns and going and shooting school kids. Where is that coming from? That's not a normal activity for a balanced human being.
Shooting in synagogues, churches.
That was
Speak up so we can hear.
Last night, yeah.
What is it?
I said not only schools, there have been shootings at synagogues, churches,
Yeah.
places of worship.
Yeah.
Exactly. Our sacred places are being used for.
Are we in the Aquarian age?
Yes.
We're supposed to be.
The sun, I think, eclipsed in 1959, and even though she said in a few years, some people thought that it did not happen until 1959. But if you read her stuff, she says in a few years. She was here until 1896. A few years. Oh, it's now 100 and almost 40 years since her departure from Earth, and we are definitely in Aquarian age, because this is the 21st century already, and we will be in it over around 2100, 2150, somewhere in there. So this stuff that we're experiencing is obviously psychological, but it is the coarse aspect of the psychological stuff that we're experiencing. I don't see one. Oh, here.
What you're saying
I'm
is,
going to read the book explanation here, where she tells us that, she says here, the Pali word ed is a synonym of Sanskrit siddhi, psychic faculties. the abnormal powers in men. This is what we're talking about. Because it's not available to all of us, it becomes abnormal. But what the scientists are now saying, that that's our normal condition. That the question we should ask is, why isn't it normal to all of us? And why does our mind perceive so little? I think it's less than 10% of its capacity that we use. Where is the other 90%? Why is it dormant? And this is when this component comes into it. The noetic and the phrenic. Now she says here, there are two kinds of psychic faculties, or CDs. One group embraces the lower, coarse, psychic and mental energies. The other is one which exacts the highest training of spiritual powers. This one. And this is where the noetic element has to be in greater activity than the physical phrenic elemental activity. And this, how do we achieve this? We talk about it, about the virtues, right? We exercise the virtues. Whenever we see someone in need of something, we immediately come to their aid. A friend of mine was telling me that she was standing in front of the grocery store, and this lady came and asked her to buy groceries for her. She told her, I have no food to feed my kids, and they went into the store, and the friend bought groceries for the lady who had requested help. That's the kind of help we need to exert. Whenever it comes to you, it becomes your duty to help the other person. And we should not say, if I help that person, I'm going to make bad karma, because if you don't do it, then it becomes an omission, and it's just as critical as the other one. So this is our age where some people continuously are increasing what they have, and others are losing everything that they had. So it is a tremendous imbalance that is also coming into our society. It wasn't that way before in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. The stock market business is depleting some people's resources and giving it to another group. This student is not judging anything, it's just simply that that's the way it is. And money, it seems like, is not really earned today. Like in the olden days, you had to go and do the field work to raise your corn or whatever, wheat. And if your product is not mature, then you lost everything. So now Monsanto owns all of the farming lands, it looks like. Thank you. Thank you for coming.